Thank you so much. This is not what you need to see. That's just my hot mess of a screen, but I will share our slides in a moment. I am going to actually, let me see if I can do that right now. In the chat, I'm going to add a link, and these are the resources that we're gonna share with you for today. And that we'd like you to use if you end up coming to all three events, that you should be able to. Now it's not going to work, is it? Let's see. No, oh, I see. It's for some reason the link won't work here. So let me send the link to you in an email.
Okay.
Real quick, and then maybe I thought it was going to work as a link and it didn't, and poo. So let's see. Actually, let me try it real quick, and maybe it looks like it's not working and it is. You never know. Nope, it just says words. Hooray. Okay, so let me just copy those real quick. I'll get both handouts to you in a moment, and if you can share them, Heather. Thought I was being slick and I wasn't. But thank you all. Thank you all for attending. It isn't it the way technology likes to make us look like goofballs. Let's hope these work. They look like they are. Huzzah. And there you go. The exercise is what Heather's going to share with you. It's several pages, and we're going to go over probably we're going to use about the first 11 today as our example, just to warn you. Now, I know Hannah and Becky are experts at this just from working with them. I was able to, along with both of them, take a 2-day course through SUNY CPD, which was great. It was about project management fundamentals. And I think from Becky's side of things, it was like, oh yeah, I already do that. Here's the name for it. And for myself and maybe Hannah, it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense as a process. And it really helped to work through that. So if anybody's interested, we can possibly see when the next one is, if you want to go a little deeper. Now, the other thing that let me see. The handout that we have is at least partially based / inspired by the fundamentals of project management handout that we received, the manual that we received during that event, but we changed some of the names and dates to better accommodate the work that we're doing. Now, the last thing before we get started, we wanted to just distinguish project versus process. It was one of the things that really resonated, I think, with all of us. And a project is a temporary endeavor. It's undertaken to create a unique product or service, whereas a process is an ongoing operation that you undertake in the normal course of business. And a project can become a process. However, I think there's often confusion between the two. So when we're talking about project management, we are not talking about day-to-day processes necessarily. We are talking about creating something new, a unique product or service. So our example, all of us that are presenting today work in guided pathways to some extent, and that was a new process or a new group, a new project that we were working through that we hope will become a process on campus. Now, this is the New York State model for project management, movement, whatever. The process for project management. It starts in phase 1, where you propose the project, whether it's an individual or group. Phase 2, you're going to establish your team, develop your charter, hold your kickoff meeting, define your cost, scope, schedule, and quality. We'll talk about CSSQ later. You'll refine your project plans, and you'll gain approval to proceed. Phase 3 is the actual planning. And to me, the initiation and planning can, like, to distinguish them, it's important to do so, but they can have a lot of overlap, I think, in some ways. So this is where you bring your team together, you refine your plans, you identify and assess risks, and then you get your written approval to proceed. So first phase 2, you say, hey, can I do this? And they say, sure. And then phase 3, where you're actually planning, you do a more, what's the word? A more formal approval process. Phase 4 is the actual execution, and that's where you're really managing not just the money, but the people, the materials, and the time. You're getting things done. You have deliverables that you want to achieve, and if any changes are made, you get written request or approval to do those. And then finally, phase 5, you close things out. And doesn't it sound so easy? But it's not, is it? You just like zoom, it's done. But that's where you think about your lessons learned. You do a closeout report. You take care of your team, however that works. You acknowledge them and you thank them, but you also finish that paperwork. That's where you close that loop. You make sure that if you need to make this a process instead of a project, you do that.
And actually, Leah, I would say that it's almost between 2, 3, 4, and 5 that you're really gathering that data, because the data is part of what's helping you make some of the decisions with initiating the project, but also planning the project. Definitely kind of throughout, it's kind of integrated in my opinion. But I'm also the data nerd in the room, so.
No, but absolutely. I just saw the message as well. I apologize. Absolutely. I think you can embed this into every step of the process. And that's one of the things that, for example, we do with guided pathways is we try to make sure that we're making data-driven decisions as much as possible, rather than shooting from the hip. It's fun to shoot from the hip, of course, but making those early. So I know, for example, both the FYE group and meta majors did a white paper to show people the data and the information that was out there. And then they're working with the data that exists to make those decisions about what should be moving forward. Now, again, we make this look so easy. It's not, of course. And this is where I think we're going to go to a break for discussion to think about your project. So Hannah, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. So I think this is one of the things that was really helpful to me, was to think about times that I've been working on a project, whether you're managing the project or you're the lowest man, the totem pole in the project. Every person in that project really has something to contribute to it. And these projects, they don't necessarily have to be, if you're thinking of projects you work on, it doesn't have to be campus projects. It could be things as simple as I needed to stain my deck or something along. That's a project. It's not a process. It's definitely a project that you have to complete. So I want you to think about some of your past experiences in projects, and think about, and guys, we should discuss what went well and what really could have gone better. Because sometimes I think when we close out a project, we don't always think about the lessons learned and how to apply them moving forward. We're just sort of like, oh, it's done. Okay, phew, we don't have to think about guided pathways ever again, which is a bad example because we'll always be thinking guided pathways. We'll be dreaming about it. But what really went well and what could have gone better? So what do you guys think from projects that you've been on?
I think that one's an easy one to tell you what went wrong. I think for me, and this isn't something just recent, I think I'm just thinking back, and this does have to do with Jefferson. All the projects that I've been involved with, it always seems like the communication gets flubbed up. the communication, either, it seems like it works a couple different ways. One, it's not necessarily the person running it or facilitating, it's some of the other people that are on it that either, I'm not sure if it comes down to they have a different perspective, or, we do have people that are obstructionists, or, looking to stop things rather than trying to identify or, be a part of something. And I'm not 100% sure. It's something just happened in the last year. Somebody else was part of the project that came in not quite at the beginning, and the person had a different perspective. And it was almost like, the easiest way to say it is, and I hate using it, silos and turf wars. So I ended up just saying, okay, this is what I'm hearing. So we're not going to have a discussion anymore. I will go back and have a conversation with somebody else to make sure that we clear it up. And that really did the trick, but it's still pushed us back from moving forward. So I think that's probably been my biggest dilemma, in terms of moving. But then so what actually went right, once we had everything together, we could move forward. But still, I think I keep getting mixed up on the communication, I think. So if you have any ways to fix that, please let me know.
And we definitely will talk about that, because that was one of the big things that came up when we were talking about, even with guided pathways and with every project, feel like a project is made or broken in the communication. So either it's going to go really well or it's really not, based on the communication. Because
I think it's the thing about communication is it's always about role and task. I mean, that's communication is about those two things. So if you have any STA experience, or background, communication is either telling you we're a group and isn't it great and we should all love it, or here are the tasks we need to do. And so I think what also fails in that is who is really responsible, who's going to say no, do we have the right people at the table? So we're going to have more conversations about that. But if we don't have the right people at the table, we go down a path, and I just finished doing a major project with that, where we were at cross purposes. There were things happening at one level, they weren't even on the community. And so then you hand this project in and they're like, oh yeah, well, that was great, thank you, we're not doing that, we're doing this. And so is it communication? It is, in the sense that they weren't there, but they didn't want to be there. And so it was this, it was a disconnect because of role and task, because of relationship and task. And what is our task for the group? What is the thing that they want us to work on? And do we have the power to do it? Or if we pull a plan together, are they going to tell us that's great, but we're not going in that direction?
And do we have the right people involved?
And we're going to talk a lot more about this. It's kind of the meat of the thing, but absolutely. I hear you totally, Leah. But I think the communication is really about that piece. It's about, so at JCC, every person has a voice. So you had two people that were voicing very clearly their opinions, but at what point as a role do you step in and stop that? Does Jerry step in and stop that? Does Mary, and at this institution, we still have a culture where, obviously we want to talk about where we're at, where we allow conversation much longer sometimes than we should, and then it just creates bad will. So that's just some thoughts that I think, I guess I should say, those are my experiences with doing some of this work.
And also the other thing, and maybe, I don't know, the communication, like depending on the size of the project, it branches out exponentially, I feel like. So with guided pathways, making sure that we're communicating with your group enough, Leah, like making sure that we're hearing that what we're doing, that senior leadership knows what we're doing and that they support it, that Title III, all those people need to know. And it's easy to forget one person in the step or in the chain, and then it falls apart. And that is absolutely a challenge.
And that is such a good point, because when it did fall apart, the person that had the issue didn't make it to the last meeting. And we figured out with the people that were there how we were going to move forward. And I blew it. I did not reach out, pass on the information. So when that person did show up, the person was like, wait, what? you know, where did this come from? And it was like, oh yeah, so that I just wrote that down in terms of, I think that's a really good point to make sure that the communication process is still there, even if all the people aren't.
But you know, I love what you said, but it's so funny. And let's just the analogy of when I talk to a student and say, if you miss a class, don't ask the faculty member what did they miss
Would they
anything.
miss anything? Yeah.
But and yet, as a culture, we have allowed people to say, "I missed it," therefore you have to rehash it, and that's on you. So there is a part, and that's that thing about role clarification that I think, and again, I just keep going back to that. And Christine and I have had these conversations, and you know, I'll tell you now, we don't have to say it later. Is you know, each one of the people that have jobs in Title III, they have a job description because the first time I did it, I didn't, and we made no movement on an entire piece of that project. Yeah, it just didn't move.
So I liked what you just said, Becky, because we do say that to our students. You know, that's the first thing we say. You have to come see me before our next meeting.
Right.
Is that something, you know, you're talking about culture, is that something that's doable? You know, when you get your group together for this project, like, look, we know that people aren't going to be able to make every meeting. So if you don't make the meeting, can you follow up with whoever's running it? I mean, does that take the onus away from the person that's running it? You know, I don't know. I mean,
No, it's absolutely. So this is interesting because, and we're going to spend a little more time on, there's a piece of the center piece of the project, which is the initials that were just thrown out, which is, you know, I just want to make sure I put them in the order, as the CSSQ, and Q is quality. And so I think that falls to the quality piece in the sense that and it's so funny thinking about it. Of course, we expect excellence from our groups, right? We expect that, but we don't talk anything about what it looks like.
yeah,
You
where's
know,
my rubric?
right. Yeah, we're, you know, so the expectations of this small work group is that you will perform, that you will do your task, that you will find out if you've missed something, that you'll read the information. We don't have those conversations up front. We don't set those boundaries because, and it makes perfect sense. When our students come in, it's initializing stuff. We have ongoing relationships with people, so we assume they all know how, you know how to do it. Walking on the furniture in the lounge, I have to tell students that, and I say to them, "Is this a norm?" And they're like, "No." And I said, "So I shouldn't have to tell you this." Just, and we feel that way, but I still have to tell those students not to walk on the furniture the first couple of weeks because it's a new environment, it's a new scope, it's a new, and so we don't take the time. I had a professor that once that said, if you don't like the way the room is set up, my speech communication, move it. You're in charge. And so I've kind of in my head, every time I stop saying, oh, should I do that? Should I do that? That's when I get nervous about, I'm not taking charge as the project manager to say, this is how I'm going to run my stuff in a kind way, not in a mean Gestapo kind of way, but in a kind way, and set up those boundaries. So that then no one's surprised when I say, you know, it sounds like you don't want to be on here. That's fine. I need worker bees. I don't need idea per people. We all have good ideas. I need some worker bees. So, and it is a failing of every group I've been on, even when I have that in the forefront of my mind, because you have to constantly, that's part of the project, is constantly reminding us that, yeah. So anyway, I don't know, and we'll get more into that in this, the next couple slides.
Well,
And
and the other
that's,
thing with the communication, I really think that has helped, like, especially with guided pathways, we've had our issues. I mean, especially something this big is going to have their issues of communication, but I was really impressed and surprised and initially like taken back that we had a subcommittees that's focus was communication. And initially I was like, well, we've got all these other avenues. We should have a committee for that. And I was all of a sudden I'm like, no, because we need to plan that from the get-go rather than just assume, assume that communication is naturally going to happen. It's not. We have to break out of the silos and find ways to do that and coming up with the plan. And this is later on too in the actual project management thing, is coming up with your communication plan. Who has to know what and who are you going to miss on those runs? It really makes a huge difference in the success.
Did Julian leave? I was just going to go ask Julian if he had questions.
I think he did. I was about to too.
Okay. All right.
before we move on, did we want to talk about what went right? Because I know, you know me, I'll talk. They know, I think everybody in this room knows, if you tell me what can we fix, I'll be like, oh, let me give you a list. What went right?
I have to say
That's
that for me, the thing I love the most about project management is the relationships you build with the people that are on your team. Because you're in the trenches with them and you're working through hard things, good things. I mean, so those relationships, those bonds, you know, Tim and I got very close with Title III. Heather and I wouldn't spend as much time Zooming with each other. Christine and I probably would have been casual acquaintances. You know, that relationship that you get when you are doing something that's intense. That's one of the things I liked.
absolutely. And I like what Leah said. She said it went right if the project was completed. If you can, I think realistically, you may not meet all your goals or your goals may change, but if you end learning something and having something to show for it, I think that's a win. That says it went right. And to me, if it does change on some level, that's normal. That's more than normal. If you just like, no, I must keep it this way, that rigidity will keep you from working well with your people. Like if you have a vision and then everybody else is like, no, you got to go where the people go. Like if everybody else is telling you it's not going to work, that doesn't mean you give up, but that means how can you adjust?
Agreed.
So Becky, I think we're up to you and the elements of a project proposal.
So one of the first phases that you'll need to be thinking about is starting with this management cycle is to create a plan. And so we just spent some time thinking about examples that you have of a project management proposal project that you had. And if you think back on it, someone had either identified an idea or identified a problem, right? So it started from some generated piece. So the first thing is kind of identification of a problem or identification of some kind of new thing that we want to do, like Heather just throwing out, could we do 1 hour in our, you know, in our office hours that's advising only? An idea was sparked. And so then usually, at least I know with my current boss, he says, okay, so let's figure out what the plan might look like, right? As soon as I have a problem or a plan, how are you gonna do it? And then we need to decide if it's a change in a process. I think that's what Christine said earlier, or because it's a daily thing that I do, or it's a major change like a website design change, or if you've been on campus, the construction that's on campus, because those have major issues. The next for me is figuring out where it sits, because if I come up with an idea, but I'm not the one that has any power to make the change, it doesn't matter. So we need to figure out, and for us, it would be, you know, is it within a curriculum? Is it within a school? Is it within a department on campus? Is it not? Like advising cuts across everything. So that's even a bigger conversation, and it probably has to go to the senior leadership. And then we start creating solutions, right? We start thinking about how can we solve this problem? How can we implement this new idea? And then we do something we don't even think about, which is why I think this initial process is important. We do these things almost without thinking. We have to look at resources. So we immediately say, I'm talking to Christina, I'm like, oh, could we call Leah and see if she'll do this for us? We start thinking about the resources that might be the appropriate people to be in there. Maybe the money, we just got a grant, and can we use some of that money to do something? And so the resources piece comes in there. Then I know for me, every time I present something, and Heather could agree with this, we put this great proposal together, and Jerry's like, I'll make sure that you put something about how it fits into the strategic plan. Make sure that it's connected to the mission in some way. And of course, in your back of your head, why would you be putting forward an idea to help students get better if it didn't fit into it? But it's important to connect those things. Maybe who benefits, right? Who benefits from this project? Why would we be doing it? Is there a benefit just because it's me? I would look better, or is it something that's really going to help the institution? How will we know we're succeeding? How do we know we succeed? And this is that data piece or some kind of artifact that proves that we've done something, that piece is very important. keeping on track, etc. And then obviously we want to decide ultimately once we have this on paper is, all right, we have all these great resources, but who's the best person to lead this project? Who's the person that's gonna have the most a chance of making it succeed? So it might not be the person that has the idea. That's really hard because that person's put a lot of time into it and they might not leave, but they might not be the person, so every time I do something like that we're presenting this week, the 10th at cabinet, I'm not presenting because the conversation was it should be a faculty member that presents the topic, even though Heather and I put it together mostly. And Heather and I did all the tweaking on it mostly. And I'm the only person that's actually given it twice at places, but it doesn't matter. The best person to do that is going to be a faculty member to present something on advising that has to do with staff training about advising, as opposed to Becky Kellogg. Because even though my title has it in it, they're going to ask, how are faculty going to feel about this? Because it's most of our advisors on campus are faculty members, not staff. And so it was an interesting conversation. I think it came that Jerry really felt strongly about that she or I were not the presenters, and even in that. And so we do have to think about those things. And then you get into the very specifics of the project, the objectives and the goals, and then the resources. And so the reason I want to talk about that is that the elements of a project proposal aren't the charter. And we're going to talk about the charter, but the charter goes hand in hand with a project proposal. Because the project proposal, you're not getting into the nitty gritty. You might put down objective 1, 2, 3, 4, but you're not saying we're going to get Christine and then we're going to get, because you don't even know if you're going to be accepted or not. You don't even know if somebody's going to say move ahead on it. You don't know, so you don't put in all that details. There are other things it's like pork belly. There are other things get added to it because other people have ideas, and so the charter gets to be a little different. So there is a writing component that's attached to a project proposal, but again, it isn't the actual final document that's going to lead the project. It's it's basically like a research paper you're putting together to say, I'd like to change something on campus or add something. Does that make sense? And it probably should be, I don't want to say quick and dirty, but it shouldn't take you 29 hours. You should be putting it together. Here are my thoughts. Here are the things why I think it fits. And presenting that information. Next slide. Oh, anything that anyone has a question on the project proposal? And it's really good to have someone like Christine who could proof all your documents, or Hannah on your initial team. So once the project plan is in place, then you have, again, we're still in number 1 we just finished, and now number 2 is actually putting together the charter. And those pieces are selecting the team, developing those roles in the project charter, holding a kickoff, and then defining the CSSQRs. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. Just want to make sure we have time to actually apply it. So once the project plan is completed, you have to do this charter. And it's the brass tacks. It's the detail stuff that you want to put in there. So one of the things that we gave you in your handouts is actually a project success problem and then the proposal. And it also has a more in-depth charter kind of things. It's not in detail because it's not 25 pages, but that's why grants are so long, because they're both the project proposal and the charter. And the charter is that more detailed piece, like how we will achieve the project. And the charts on documents on how long the project's going to take, the ending and the beginning, and all those kind of things are in there. So a couple things, so that's the overview. But if we look at selecting the team, the first thing that you need to figure out is who's going to be your project lead or leaders. And so the project lead or leaders is in charge of making sure that everything that we say in this charter gets done. And as Christine said, it might change a bit. It may morph a bit. Something might get added for the Title III grant. We just added, a whole new objective that wasn't there at the beginning of the project. So you need to have your project leader that is watching the project and making sure that it's moving forward and keeping track of the charter. Here's the one that we don't do well at Jefferson, I don't think. You need a sponsor, a clear executive sponsor. Who is the person at the executive leadership level, senior leadership, or at Jerry's level who is going to be talking to those people about things that you need, things that you're moving on and working on? So that's that communication piece, but it's also, what if you hit a stumbling block with money? What if you have somebody wants to add something because there's been a change in the institution? So you need that high level person who will be your sponsor. And I think we've had some success, things not be successful because of that. And I think about, for example, the first time we did the orientation class. So we worked so hard. Carlton worked so hard on this, but if we didn't have the champions, yep, excellent. I don't think we had the AVP at that time, the VP at that time saying, I am going to roll it out no matter what. And when I talked with Dawn, when she first talked about it, she goes, Mary Rose said, we are doing this. As soon as you get that kind of buy-in, your project is going to move forward. So that executive sponsorship is really critical. You probably want somebody the person who's got the money on the committee, or at least someplace in so the financier or who's doing the money. Now could be you could be the project director and the person that's handling the money. Sometimes it's not. In the grant we're doing right now, I'm doing the grant part, Christine's doing the project management, along with two assisted people. So she has a co-team, and then I'm making sure the money gets spent in the appropriate way. So you have to think about that. And then obviously you need significant staff from the areas that need to be there. So in this particular first example we give you, if you don't have somebody from IT for the web, it's not going to work. So that's a significant person that needs to be on that committee, because they need that buy-in. So you're going to select your team very specifically. So when we were doing, Christine, maybe you want to talk about the hours we did putting together the co-chairs, the subcommittee the subcommittees, because we wanted every stakeholder to have voice.
Well, and part of that was really talking to it. I don't remember what, Leah, were you were part of that when we did the playing the game, right? That event with, I forget that guy's name. They hit it right on the head. They were like, you have to communicate with people. You have to find out who will work, and the strengths. The challenge, of course, at Jefferson is we have these, I call it the curse of competence. You're really good at something. I'm looking at you, Heather. You're really good at something, and then people are like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And then they get overloaded. So on one hand, getting enough people, but also spreading it around and trying to get some of those people that maybe aren't involved. So I know at least in FYE, well, I shouldn't say that necessarily, but I know in at least a few of the groups, not just FYE, but a few of the groups, we tried to bring in people who may have been initially resistant to the process to get them to see the value. And we've been talking, Abby, Chelsea, and I have been talking to FLCC. They did something similar. And now that person's like one of their biggest champions.
Right. I think that's a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you get, I mean, and maybe you see it, Leah, too, in the work groups that meta majors are doing. I think a lot of people are like, grumble. And then we get into the work and they're like, oh, the work is good. We don't need the name, we need the work. And so if you can get people to get passionate about the work, but that team is imperative to that. If you don't have somebody leading it who can push it forward, that's a problem. And I'll say without the support of Becky and without Abby and Chelsea, I don't know that I would be that person, by myself. I don't think I would be. I think finding those strengths is important, but I'll shut up for now.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think, I talked about the next area, which is developing roles. I think for the people that are on your actual steering committee, you need job descriptions. You just need it, because you need to have something that you're gauging against, especially if they're being paid. If you have a paid staff person, and some projects do and some don't, and paid can be a reduction in loads. It's still a finance, there's a piece that's being offered for your you need a job description. You need to say, these are the tasks I expect. You know, we don't expect our students to hit a moving target, but then we put somebody like, you know, Leah, we give you a project and then we like, yeah, figure it out. It's this moving target all over the place. We need to be more specific with our expectations for people. I think Heather got my first job description for Title III. I wanted to hammer down for staff development, and it's made, and we've made a lot of changes on it, and we'll talk about the changes that happen in the scope of your project. But it doesn't have to just be people that are paid. You know, I'm not sure we do a good job, even in our processes of committees, to say, this is the role of what a committee person does. You know, your role. And so sometimes somebody will say to me, they're new and we haven't told them, and they're like, I'm supposed to bring this back from my department. Yeah, that's why you're sitting there. But because we haven't told them that, right? We haven't explained the role, it doesn't get there. It doesn't get there. So that's early on. It's not once you have, you know, once you have your team together, it's you need to have these things in early phases done. And so I talked about the project charter. The project charter will define all the CSSQR issues. And so that project needs to be developed. At this point, you're making the timelines. You're making all of the things that are part of the CSSQ piece. So you're going to have some of these pieces. They're not all going to be done. They're going to be whole. So you have a selected team, kind of. You have the project proposal. That was number one. In team, you're like selecting a team. You have some charter stuff written down. It might be more developed than others, depending on how much you have. Some of the deadlines, because I know we're done with Title III on X date. 5 years later, it's done, right? So I know some of that stuff. And this charter gets started to develop. I have my core objectives in that, but I don't have the details yet. That's when we're going to have the team kind of help us a little bit with some of the details. So we have a hold a kickoff meeting, and we say, gosh, this is the team, guys. I'm working on this wonderful project charter. And I want to get your thoughts and ideas on this. I want you to be thinking of this because I need some help making sure that no pitfalls are in them, the things that I haven't thought of. And the pitfalls come in with defining the CSSQ. So that stands for the cost, the scope, the schedule, the quality, and we like adding risk. Risk was a separate category in our training, but we think it should be right from the start on that. So let's talk a little bit about what this would look like in terms of cost. We'll start with scope, because that's the one that you've done a little bit of work on. You probably did 7 paragraphs in your proposal about scope, and we want it to be 25 words deep. You know, so now you're going to pull this down. So if I'm going to change the website, there are 2 ways I can approach it. I could say we're going to make updates to the current website so it is more more student friendly. Or we can say we are doing a major revamp of the website, very different language, that will do the following things. So the proposal we gave you did that bigger, broader area. And so the scope for them was a couple sentences. Their sentence was, it's on page 3. Oh gosh. Must be far. I went down too far. So basically is the department project is initially to complete a comprehensive review and design of the department's web presence. This will include the department's main page as well as the website. And then they put in information like the web improve the presence of the web page, improve the governance, improve the identity of outside sources. So then they got into more things that had to do with objectives. But the scope is that one sentence that says what the project is. So why is that critical? Because it also defines what it isn't. It defines what shouldn't be in there. So one of the things we had lots of talks about was scope creep. That all of a sudden somebody's like, and I'll give you a great example. If you've been up on campus recently, and I don't know if any of you have. So every time I go out, I'm thinking, oh, we're gonna have a new circle. Except that they decided, what the hell, we'll pave the whole road all the way to enrollment at the same time. Well, guess what? That's 2 entrances to the college that are impacted. I think that was scope creep. It's like, we're here anyway. We can pull up that blacktop. Oh yeah, let's redo the circle. So if you haven't been over here, they tore off the entire circle. And so there's really no way to get into the campus right now. And I'm sure that was absolutely, absolutely about them being here saying, you know, for an additional, you know, I'm going to say $10,000, which sounds horrible. We can tear up this all at the same time. The equipment's here, the guys are here, they're hanging out. And we didn't think about the impact of that when people are just trying to drive on campus, right? So hopefully, pray that we'll have it done in time so when students come here. So scope. Schedule is the start of the project, the end of the project, and all the things in between. What are those tasks that have to be done, the milestones, the decision points, the lead time you need for all of that kind of stuff. And again, in this project proposal, they start talking about those organizations, the impact on them. And they don't get into the details because obviously this would have been a 400-page paper, but you could see build a standard, consistent number 4, public branding and image for their new web. That needs to get done before people are actually loading up the pages. So they'd want to put that early on. So once you list those things out, you can start making a timeline. And I know that Hannah got a great Gantt chart that Christine's using, and I'm going to have her steal it for some other projects, I think. That chart is a really great chart to see the big picture, and then you can look at those little time frames. So that's the schedule, and we're really good at that. I think as educators, we're pretty good at this part because it's very linear. The quality I kind of alluded to, and the quality is kind of 2 different things. It's the outcome of performance, and are we staying on track, and why aren't we staying on track, and you know, why are they still tearing up blacktop and we're at schools in 2 days? You know, so that's the quality. Are they doing that? But there's also the quality of the team. There's also the quality of the sitting down and saying, hey, Beck, you're not performing. So what can I do to help you? And of course, we're doing one of those right now in Title III. We're trying to figure out why this hasn't worked and what part was ours and what part was the person that we're working with who was trying to do a good job, but something didn't work, right? So that quality piece. And then the last one, even though it's the first in the initials, is the cost. So you need to estimate the budget. You need to align those costs with other areas. You need to think about the cost even of people. So, you know, how much time do we put our energy and our time in a project that might not work because we don't think we'll get buy-in? I think, Christine, you mentioned that earlier. So those are the 4 big ones. And then we like to include risk because at this point, if you have a list of things for this website, right, and you are never going to decide on a look for it, that's a risk. We need to have our risk discussion right then. We're never going to get, for example, our president to agree to X. So let's not put that down, you know, or let's have it as an idea generating thing when we are meeting with our executive sponsor and get a feel for, you know, meet with executive sponsor and talk about these 5 risky things so we can decide whether they work. And sometimes risk isn't about risk, it's more about cost. So great example, we're looking at a scheduler right now in Title III. If the cost is, I don't know, $60,000 a year, it's a good risk for everyone because that would probably could eat. If it's $150,000 a year, it doesn't make sense to spend Title III money on it, right? That's a risk that is not, it's not sustainable. It's not manageable. It's a risk the institution probably can't take. So the risk is not only the issues of what are the barriers and those things, but also, you know, are we going to institutionalize it? How will it work? Who's going to own it when it's done? Who will take over the annual processing of that wonderful thing? So we have DegreeWorks, but who makes sure it's accurate? You know, so if you've got something and you put it up and you've done all this work and now it's there, isn't that great? But if it doesn't get updated, the processing, then it's a risk for the institution. So those are the things that have to be included in this charter. And then the other thing, just to let you know, and we'll talk more about it later, is the charter constantly is in motion. So things get added and changed to it. So, or tweaked a bit, or, you know, so I'll give, you know, a great example. You know, we want to have 4 ed planners, but can we afford them? Right. So then you have to punch, you have to make the decision whether you're going in that direction or doing something else. And then you date it. So the original charter will have that day that you all signed off on it. The executive, I don't mean signed, literally said, we're ready to move. And then the next time, like right now, Title III is looking at the charter and saying, we're not going to do this. We're going to change this and tweak it a bit and do X. For the career, the career person that we've had in the original, are we going to do what we originally said 3 years ago, or are we going to do something new? So that's kind of I would say the heart of it is getting this plan ready so that when you get actually to producing, I guess that's the word I want to say, that this is done, that these things are done. Any questions? And that's a lot. That was one day, right? One whole day, so we're trying to do that took a little more time than I thought, about 20 minutes. Hannah, hand it off to you for the next part, which is.
Oh, no, it's actually back to me, I think.
Oh, sorry. Chris,
No
sorry.
problem. No problem.
I can BS my way through it though.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. So this is why I gave it to myself. We wanted to use, and I don't know if we can completely do this, but maybe we just focus on the risks, for example, given the time allotted. We wanted to look at the project proposal example we had on pages 8 to 9 in particular. So it spans from pages 2 to 11, but pages 8 to 9 really talk about the organizational impacts and the risks. And we wanted to think about, we weren't sure how many people were going to come. So we wanted to think about how that would change if it were about a college. We're not necessarily saying our college, we don't want to step on anybody's toes with the website, but if this were about a college, whether it's a 4-year or a 2-year, how would it be different, do you think, either the organizational impacts or the risks? So I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. I'm going to look at it because we asked the question and I don't know that I personally tried to answer it myself. So let me bring up pages 8 to 9. So this is page 8, the organizational impact. And I can actually make that bigger there. There it goes. Let me see the chat.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I liked, so for your organizational impact that I'm looking at on my own screen, do they typically just use the same type of verb, the same type of words in all of the documents that you're trying to do? Fostering, improve, build a standard, extend, create, all those things? Would you say that that's a typical words that are used for a project?
I would say not in New York State, but this one, they actually is a website for an educational institution. And it's not a college, it's a state ed institution. So I think they probably borrowed it.
Gotcha.
Thinking from a real school. The other ones didn't start with verbiage quite this way. This is very educational. Don't you think, Christy?
Well, it seems like it.
Well, and I think that's something, it's a really silly thing, but I think it's one of the things that I like about that we did in, say, Title III is that parallelism and consistency, that you're starting with verbs, you're starting with action. So you're supporting, you're providing. Yeah. And there's only a few that don't fit into that, but most of them are like, this is I think in this case, the organizational impact can connect to the deliverables. So the more they think about deliverables, the clearer it's going to be. These are the risks, and I apologize, it broke off, but they talk about resource limitations, which not us, not anybody in a college at the present moment has resource issues. No, not at all. We don't have. Oh, what were you going to say, Hannah?
I was just going to start the conversation, but
I was about to say we shouldn't pick on poor Leah just because she was nice enough to come. If any of us have ideas, yeah, go for it.
I think a big one that obviously, well, it's an obvious one, but that would be a definite challenge is we have, our clients are a little different. We have students dealing with it rather than the customer service angle. So it has to be, if we're making a shift, there's definitely a window that you would want to have that shift happen, because you don't want it to happen the first week of classes. You don't want it to have it happen when registration is in full swing. Like, there's key windows we'd want to try to avoid.
Or the last day of classes either.
That too.
It's
Not from
true.
any experience ever, but
It's true.
Yeah, and I think interestingly for us, I love that identify other work that will not be accomplished. I think we do this badly here. It's like, yeah, just keep doing all of it plus, because those are important too. So I think that risk is something that probably be on all of ours, and we need to think about if it's a big project like a web project. I mean, that's a huge project. I can't remember how many pages we have, but it's outrageous. Then you actually almost have to have that person not have other projects on their plate if you want to be successful. Right.
Well, and there is this, I think it's hard because everybody, whatever project you're doing, everybody thinks their thing is the most important. And so how do you really prioritize that? Like, that's just, to be honest, everybody's like, no, but this has to happen. But does it? You know, we don't measure things like we're the person that goes 1 to 10, how much does it hurt? And it's like 10. And then, like, if you were hit by a Mack truck, would you be 10? And it's like, okay, 9.5. Like, it's that mentality that everything's the most important thing. And what will get lost in the process. I know we have only about 4 minutes left. Was there anything that you noticed that you wanted to add, Leah, about either what you see as different in the organizational impact, the risks, or just any other questions that you had on this first day?
I thought that the information that you're presenting is great. I've been hearing a lot about the project management, so I was really excited to have this to be able to come to, because I am on some projects and I am running 2 of them and feel extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? Not prepared. So, there's these pieces and parts, and I like the way that this is presented because it makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense to have some of this taken care of before you get to the whole first time you get together to meet. I liked the 4 risk dependency questions, like you were just saying, what can't get accomplished. I think that's great. And knowing that up front. And I just wanted to be clear, the project charter would be all of the stuff that's together, right? Is that what the project charter is?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because most of the work I've done has been grant based, and I mean I've done things within my office, but the big projects I work on, they've been grant based. So the grant, when you write a grant, it has both the proposal and what I would call the charter. So if you looked at any grant, what it does is it spends the first 10 or 15 pages saying, this would be great, we love this is why, here are the goals, and then it stops and says, Leah, this is her degree, she's in charge. Christine, this is her degree. First semester, we're doing objective 1, goal 2. So the charter starts when you are putting the brass tacks down, when you are taking the proposal, and now I'm operationalizing it. I'm operationalizing the proposal. That's the brass. That's the charter.
Because
So
I'm the lead of the Truth Grant, and I also co-wrote it with Corey. So
Okay.
I did both, but now I'm on that. I have that, but I didn't know that was all right. So now I know what that is. Okay.
Right. So that's the difference in them, is that if you do a grant, they're built in, because the grant won't give it to you unless you tell them on September 15th, we'll be introducing Leah at a big conference. They want that specificity. But when we're doing proposals, president doesn't want that specificity. What she wants is, will you give me the cash for this? So that's the proposal part. And then you say, yes, she says yes. And then we say, now we have to put in the details, and that's that charter, because the charter is what you're going to come back next year and say, we didn't get that done. That's okay, because this risk happened, this risk happened. Then now we're ready, and it's not going to get done until May 2023. So you can make changes to the program based on how it flows, because it's time specific and not philosophy, concept specific.
Okay.
So those are the differences between those
So,
two documents. Great
Becky,
question.
I'm just gonna ask for you to make a parallel to the action plan we did for NACADA at that conference. Is that a little bit of both of those?
So proposal would be putting in that scope and then saying, we believe that staff development will greatly impact the things you're going to say at the conference is your proposal.
Okay,
The document you put together has those deadlines on it.
so that's more the charter.
Right, and that's where you start in that charter. Now we have a lot more to do on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that's kind of that piece before you've gotten what you would share with the group that's going to do it, and then you would start fleshing out each one of those areas. So Becky's going to do the lunch talk. Hannah's going to take care of the assessment tool. You're not, but I mean, Christine is going to do the presentation on opening day on this topic. So that's when you start. Those are the details that you put in. Now, it doesn't have to be quite that minute when you start, because you're not going to know year 4 that Hannah's going to do the data. Maybe you will. In Title III, she is our data person for the whole time. It's part of her job. She's got, she is entwined, being paid, has a job description. So, but some people you don't. We still don't know who the career person is, but we still want to have some internship stuff done by the end. So it depending, what we'd say is this person hasn't been hired. So these are the objectives. They'll flesh it out when they come. And then you add, that's why you're adding to it. Because then Christine is going to say to me, Beck, if you're hiring that person under you, how are they fleshing this document out? How are they moving ahead? So it's a living document. It's a living document. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Leah, doctor. It's always fun. I don't know about you. I forget sometimes and I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
We are going to have a part 2 and 3. Part 2 is next week, correct? So we totally understand if you can't make it. We'd love to see you if you can. We're going to keep working. We're going to get a little more granular than we have already about some of the processes and actually do an example. So
we're going to work mostly next time. I think, Christine, is we're working on, you tell us what the C is, what the S is. What, so that
I took notes.
Yeah, and I'd share my notes with you. I mean, I actually was looking at it to make sure that I got it right too, the definition. So I can share mine if we want to. I think I shared them with you, Christine, and I'm sure, Hannah, you have some notes, and so does Christine from that.
And I even have some basic notes. Some of them are just page numbers that don't exist for you, but I'm happy to share that project management handbook as well. I don't know if we're allowed to share it, just hear everybody, but I can't see why they'd care if we give it to, if I share it with you. So I'm happy to forward that along. I can actually forward along all the materials.
Right, and I will send this to Leah. We went to the risk part, and then of course there are 3 more bullets. We're finding the project, gaining approval, creating a project repository, but it's, there's just a lot of stuff going on, and we're starting with phase 3 next time, and yeah. So, but it's timing. So, but I'll send that to you because I think it's, again, when he said gaining approval, I typed it and then wrote bullets about why that was important for me. So I can share that, excuse me, with you. And we're all a work in progress. Some of the stuff I'm doing well and some I'm not.
Great.
And I will continue to add whatever resources they share publicly in the Wakelet, so that if you do miss something, Leah, and you want to come back, everything will be in that one Wakelet that I already shared.
Okay. My plan is to come back because I'm working on something for the second thing that I'm doing, and I need this because I feel like I'm just kind of floating along, and I know I have got stuff to do, and I need to be able to put it together, and this will help. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Heather, for being our moderator of sorts, and have a great day. I hope to see all of you next week.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.
I'm just cleaning.